Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement, Adaptable NPCs, designed by Trevor Armstrong for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Brian, Richard, and Joe, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy and Yuma, Marcos, David Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lounge, and Auxi. Thank you all very much for your support. Hello! So I have reviewed several NPC supplements now, which is an offshoot of, I guess, whenever people do monster manual supplements. NPCs specifically mean these are typically humanoid, and they're typically more involved in the story, so that you meet them as a potential quest giver or even a party member. An NPC, to literally use like a video game term, is a non-player character, but that means they're still built like a player character. That's the PC part of it. Just the non means you don't control them directly, so it's a DM controlling them, or the AI, whatever, in a video game. Anyway, it's a very good resource to have for any adventure. Now, the monster manual does come with several humanoid stat blocks in the back, and if you're anything like me, those are the ones you probably look at as much, if not more so, than the entire rest of the monster manual, because typically your players are just fighting people a lot of the time, or they're dealing, not necessarily fighting, but just interacting with people, so you need those kind of stat blocks in general, or maybe they recruit some friend or something. Those are very useful stat blocks that get used again and again and again, whereas you might only use a specific, big, cool monster that looks good on paper. You might only use that one time ever in your DM career, versus NPCs that get used over and over and over again. So these kind of resources, I think, are very useful to have. This one in particular has 70 unique NPC stat blocks, and they are far more than the usual ones that I've seen, which are, like a swashbuckler and like a priest, or they're very much almost as if somebody took like the Final Fantasy job system, or maybe any kind of JRPG class, or like a Monster Hunter, warrior design, or even literally taken from older D&D like prestige classes. So for example, there's a Pale Master in here. All of these things make them far more interesting than the usual kind of generic NPCs that I would see. These are really more unique NPCs. You can see by the artwork here, it's like a sun paladin or something, a sun knight. Just far more interesting on paper than the usual kind of random generic NPCs that you would find, and that means that they would be more interesting as primary villains, or NPCs that join the party, which I think is a good resource to have. I do like that they are divided up between CR ratings. You can see here, although they are listed alphabetically ultimately, but you can see at a glance that there's a pretty good variation between really low-level NPCs that probably you're really not going to use much, the hermit, the apothecary, the drunken brawler. A lot of it is going to be Tier 1 and Tier 2, which I think is probably the majority of where a lot of D&D games are played, and then you've got a few high-level, which are normally used as enemies. Big kind of end bosses in dungeons. Now, we're going to go through these real quick. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but the first thing you'll notice as I'm flipping through here is that there is a large amount of artwork in this supplement. I have ultimately mixed feelings about this. First of all, the artwork is all kind of deviant art style, which is fine. I'm not going to comment too much on that. And art is, like anything, very subjective. I personally am not a big fan of this particular kind of dark muted art style. This is from a couple different artists, I believe. And I also had a complaint about the fact that a lot of the female art is nearly naked. Which is just feels archaic at this point. That's like very kind of 80s, which is to have the and really that was in those days when it was like Conan the Barbarian. Conan himself was also half naked. There was kind of a style at the time, but now it's gotten to where like the dudes all get to be like fully armored, just beefed up badasses, and the women are just complete sex toys, and that's lame. And you're really kind of you're turning a blind eye toward half your audience with that, and it sucks. But like almost every single one of these female characters are just kind of sexified, and it's not. I'm not gonna dwell on it too much. I'm just not a fan of it. Like, I'm a straight dude. I love attractive women, certainly, but and you can definitely have that in your D&D character as well. But when every single woman character is kind of dressed like that, that one's pretty good. It's just distracting. It's distracting in a stupid way that didn't need to be that way. I'm also not a fan of the way the art actually takes up like 2/3 of the page in a lot of these cases. I don't mind the actual organization of it here with the stat block kind of overlaying some of the art. I think that looks fine, especially when it's like this, where it's more of like a half thing. But I was hoping for more actual written content. If I'm going to buy your DM's Guild product, I'm not buying it for the art, like the art is fine. It's a nice bonus to have that, and I think it's really nice, especially if you're going to have an NPC book, to have art for all of those NPCs. That's really impressive, even if I don't particularly like that art style. But I'm buying it for the content. I'm buying it for the written content on it. So a stat block is a given. Obviously, we need the stat block, and some of these are very, very extensive and nice stat blocks. Hello, cat. Go by the camera. Thank you. But I was less thrilled about the fact that we only get like 2 small paragraphs for each of these NPCs, and it's kind of the bare minimum description. I think it's enough, but I was hoping for just a little bit more. And one thing I would have really loved to see is like an example, which I'll go into that a little bit because it's almost teased the way that's used in the battle maps later on. But just like an example NPC, like a story hook to be able to use this NPCs. Like, for example, give me an example of a Pale Master, maybe even like with that art as inspiration. Like, have that be a character with a name, and this is why this character would approach the heroes or would be at the end of a dungeon or something. That kind of thing would be really fun and go a long way towards fleshing out, like, how as a DM I could use these NPCs. Like, give me some good story ideas. I think that would go a long way here. I was ultimately disappointed by how little description there was here, but really it's not small when compared to like the NPC stat block section at the end of the monster manual. That's about as much description as we get, if not even more. But it's just looking at it with the extensive stat block and then the huge pictures we get, it seems like we're not getting that much information. I would have really liked to get a little more information, even if that meant a little bit less of the art. But the fact that we get 70 here is pretty damn impressive, and they're all really fun characters, and they remind me. I mean, the art design is very much like kind of a Monster Hunter, Warcraft, over the top, which is fun. I like that. But they seem pretty fun. They've got a lot of neat stat blocks. Nothing seems too crazy. There's a good variety between challenge ratings, which is fun. But none of them seem mundane or boring, other than the few like CR18 that are just kind of bullshit. But I appreciated a lot of what we had here. There were some really, really fun, drawn from older editions of D&D, as well as just a lot of like kind of advanced fantasy class that we would see. That makes me think like a lot of these would be kind of those just badass, high-level NPCs that join the party and are kind of there to show off, or as really fun villains to run for the party to deal with, that aren't necessarily monsters, but certainly still just humanoid villains. The other thing I want to touch on, which is a really crazy bonus thing that we get here, called Pathways for Adventure, which is 8 battle maps that are included in this NPC book, which I was not expecting at all, and I was really pleasantly surprised by this. We're given 8 sample dungeons that are drop-in dungeons that utilize a lot of the unique NPCs used in this supplement. And here we get these nice little, just very, very brief, like one-sentence examples of how to use some of the NPCs we just got, which is what I really wanted more of. So, for example, this Dwarven Burial Ground. It says, a grave thief promises untold treasures have been found in an ancient Dwarven tomb. A frozen wasteland uses the Tundra Wanderer. A marshland uses the Warden. A pirate's vessel uses the Shaman and the Goblin Corsair, I believe it was called. Accompanies Shaman aboard the ship of untrustworthy scallywags while delivering a ritualistic artifact to his tribesmen. That's great. That's awesome. Give me those in the NPC descriptions. Would have been amazing to have those kind of like story hooks for all of them. But I think this is a really fun bonus to have, and it's an example of how to use different NPCs as hindrances, as the big bads at the end of the dungeon, the actual quest givers at the beginning of a dungeon, and then maybe even traditional like NPC DM controlled allies to help you in a dungeon and maybe shine some light on some of the things happening in there. And I think these do a good job of that, with the caveat that they are basically just hack and slash rampages. Like there's no real, there's not. It's not a whole lot of storytelling. There's not a lot of puzzle. There's no puzzles. There's not a lot of exploration beyond the physical map that you see, which is kind of fine and kind of a complaint, because it's fine in the fact that I was not expecting to get dungeons at all. So I was really impressed by the fact that we get these dungeon maps. I can cycle through them real quick. That one's really cool looking. So that's really neat. But if I'm reviewing it as a dungeon, then it definitely comes up short, because it's just not. It's almost like a random dungeon crawl with just shit like thrown in there. Like you meet these kind of enemies, and there's these enemies, and it's just kind of the way the map is drawn. That's the way it is. So that's, in terms of a dungeon, it's not super well fleshed out or anything. But I was also impressed that we just got dungeons in general. So that's a cool bonus, and I really wasn't expecting that in an NPC booklet. I really enjoy seeing this for supplements, and that is using whatever the supplement is adding, whether it's NPCs or monsters, whatever, giving me some kind of content that then, if it's a sample dungeon or whatever, that uses those NPCs, and then as a DM I can start seeing, okay, I can see where these pieces fit together and how best to use these enemies and how best to use them tactically, what kind of enemies would be with them or would be fighting them. Those kind of things are really helpful for a DM to have. By the way, and I'll go over this with my pros and cons, I was also impressed with the fact that we get separate DM maps and player maps. Obviously, these are the embedded DM maps in the PDF, but you get a player map of this, which does not have any of these number annotations, so that you can use it, for example, in something like Roll20, and it's already gridded and you just slot it right in there. You also get a separate zip file full of every single NPC artwork as a handout, as well as every single NPC as a token, which is directly used in something like Roll20. That is a huge thumbs up from me. Very, very impressed by that, even if I'm not super big on the art. Let's get one more pass with the cat. Good job, cat. Even if I'm not super big on the artwork, then I still really appreciate having actual handouts and tokens for all of these things. It's so many things in the DM's Guild I review that do not have the player handouts available. It's just all that information is just for the DM, and especially if you're going to have extensive artwork like that, I think it does help a lot being able to have those give me that as a handout and even go above and beyond as a token. That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. So I like these dungeon maps. I generally like the content that we're given here. I have some complaints about the art. I have complaints about the art in terms of the actual art itself, just the style, and just based on the fact that I think too much real estate is given to the art versus the actual written description. I would have liked to see like at least another paragraph or two for these characters, and like I said, having like a sample like story hook or sample character for each one is definitely more work, but I think would have been really, really fun, and I would have appreciated that a lot and made the shorter descriptions, I think, more palatable. So let's go over my pros and cons for Adaptable NPCs. Pros: 70 new humanoid NPC stat blocks from CR18 to CR15. That is an awesomely huge amount of content. Fun ideas drawn from older D&D prestige classes and JRPGs. I put JRPGs. I wasn't able to come up with specific analogs back and forth, but I have a feeling a lot of these are directly drawn from other RPGs and fantasy, which is great. That's basically how D&D thrives. It's kind of uses, and obviously D&D was the basis for all our modern fantasy video games pretty much. So I think that give and take back and forth works really, really well, and I like seeing these, and it makes these NPCs more interesting. 8 drop-in dungeon maps that utilize many of the new NPCs as party companions or foes. That is a really cool bonus that I was not expecting to have. And Pro, separate player handouts and tokens for all 70 NPCs, as well as DM and player maps for each map. I appreciate all of that content immensely, especially having all of that separate token and battle map means as somebody that runs on Roll20, I can just throw all that stuff in there and away we go. Granted, I have to build a character sheet, but hey, we can't have everything. Cons, there's far more attention is given to NPC pictures than descriptions. I just didn't like how the actual real estate page developed that way with, I think, to me, it was more important to have more written description than it was to get the artwork. Now, part of that might be because I wasn't a big fan of the artwork, and that's kind of another con of mine, is specifically just the lots of the tiresome boob armor and half-naked women for almost every single female character. That point gets distracting. You want to have one or two that are specifically like, sexy draws, that's fine. And you have some sexy dudes too, but when every single one of them is that way, and meanwhile the dudes get to be, just kind of beefed up, heavily armored badasses, that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And then cons, the dungeons are a little more than hack and slash rampages, and I really hesitate to put that as a con because I like the fact that we got dungeons at all. I was not expecting that. But if I'm going to look at it from a critical eye, then the dungeons are a little bit bare bones. Final verdict. Though not a fan of the art, emphasis, or style, Adaptable NPCs features a huge amount of fun humanoid stat blocks, and the drop-in dungeons are a welcome bonus. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.